Area 51. In 1989, on the edge of the Nevada desert, a radar operator assigned to a civilian monitoring station outside Las Vegas recorded something unusual along the boundary of Groom Lake. The object did not enter the restricted airspace. It hovered precisely along the invisible line separating public sky from classified territory. It remained stationary for 90 seconds, then accelerated vertically at a speed that exceeded 7,000 miles per hour, according to preliminary calculations. No sonic boom followed. No flight plan matched. And the moment the coordinates were transmitted to authorities, the signal vanished from the system. Area 51 sits inside the Nevada Test and Training Range, a protected military complex spanning nearly 2.9 million acres. Its airspace is among the most restricted on Earth. Civilian pilots who drift even slightly off course are intercepted within minutes. Satellite passes over the region are monitored. Even commercial mapping services once blurred the terrain. Officially, the base was used for testing experimental aircraft, such as the U-2 and SR-71. Unofficially, it has been associated with unidentified aerial phenomena since the late 1940s. The geography of Groom Lake is stark and isolated. The dry lakebed stretches over 4 miles in length, surrounded by mountain ranges that shield ground activity from view. Temperatures exceed 110 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. Visibility is near perfect on clear nights. It is a location chosen specifically for secrecy, yet that secrecy seems to attract attention from above. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, multiple civilian radar logs recorded objects hovering just outside the perimeter before darting away at extreme velocity. In some cases, these objects were tracked simultaneously by FAA systems and private aviation equipment. They did not behave like conventional aircraft. Their acceleration curves lacked the gradual increase typical of jet propulsion. Instead, velocity spiked instantly, suggesting thrust mechanisms unknown to modern aerospace engineering. Former base security personnel have described nights when silent lights drifted beyond the fence line, never crossing into restricted airspace, but never leaving either. According to declassified maintenance logs from nearby installations, electromagnetic disturbances were occasionally recorded during these sightings. Temporary radio interference, brief compass fluctuations, and unexplained voltage dips occurred within a narrow corridor west of the lakebed. No internal testing schedules matched the times of those disturbances. When journalists attempted to file Freedom of Information requests regarding radar anomalies near Area 51, many of the documents returned were heavily redacted. Several referenced unidentified external activity adjacent to secure testing operations. No further explanation was provided. In 2013, the CIA officially acknowledged the existence of Area 51 for the first time, but denied any association with extraterrestrial technology. The statement addressed decades of speculation, but did not address recurring aerial incursions near the boundary. Satellite imagery released years later revealed faint circular ground markings several miles from the main facility. Independent analysts speculated they could be sensor calibration arrays. Others suggested they were tracking grids designed to monitor high-altitude anomalies. Access to the surrounding mountains remains prohibited under federal law. Trespassers face immediate detention. If Area 51 is merely a testing ground for advanced human aircraft, then why do so many unidentified objects appear precisely along its invisible border without crossing it? Why do they linger, observe, and depart in ways that mimic reconnaissance behavior? And why do official reports refer to activity external to known projects without clarification? The desert is silent most nights. The fences stand still. The runways lie dormant under moonlight, yet the radar occasionally records shapes that approach, hover, and vanish. Not entering, not engaging, just watching. As if the most secret airspace on Earth is not only being guarded from below, but studied from above. Hessdalen Valley. In the winter of 1981, residents of a remote valley in central Norway began documenting something that refused to behave like weather, aircraft, or imagination. The first reports came from farmers near the small village of Hessdalen. Bright white lights were hovering above the snow-covered hills for minutes at a time. They did not flicker like stars. They did not drift like satellites. They remained suspended in absolute silence before accelerating across the sky at speeds estimated above 18,000 miles per hour. The valley itself stretches roughly 9 miles long and less than 2 miles wide, bordered by steep mountains rich in zinc, copper, and iron deposits. Population density is minimal. There are no major airports nearby, no heavy military infrastructure, and little artificial light. In theory, it should be one of the quietest skies in Europe. Instead, it became one of the most active aerial anomaly zones ever recorded. By early 1982, sightings were occurring up to 20 times per week. Entire families would gather outside after dark, expecting the lights to appear. And they did. Blue spheres, yellow globes, occasionally red pulses moving in linear paths before stopping abruptly mid-air. Unlike many UFO reports, these events were not isolated. They were repeatable, predictable, recurring. In 1983, Norwegian researchers established Project Hessdalen. Cameras, radar systems, magnetometers, spectrometers, and laser measurement devices were installed across the valley. The goal was not to prove alien visitation, but to determine whether the lights were a rare atmospheric phenomenon. The data complicated that assumption. Radar confirmed that some of the objects had solid structure. Optical instruments confirmed luminosity without visible propulsion exhaust. Spectrographic analysis showed emission lines inconsistent with known plasma discharges. In several instances, objects were tracked moving vertically at speeds that would exceed 30,000 miles per hour before coming to a complete stop. No sonic boom followed. No thermal plume was detected. One particularly documented event occurred in September 1984. A white orb hovered roughly 300 feet above ground level for over 40 minutes. Instruments recorded slight electromagnetic fluctuations during its presence. When it finally moved, it split into two smaller lights before disappearing behind the mountain ridge. Radar lock was lost within seconds. The phenomenon continues to this day. In 1998, a permanent automatic measurement station was installed. It remains operational, capturing anomalous events several times per year. Some researchers have proposed a geological explanation involving ionized gas interacting with metallic mineral deposits under specific atmospheric conditions. Yet, that theory fails to account for controlled movement, apparent reaction to observation, or the repeated hovering behavior. Military officials have visited Hessdalen periodically over the decades. Official statements describe cooperative research efforts. However, several researchers reported data requests that were never returned. Hard drives were examined, copies of recordings were taken. Some early footage from the 1980s is no longer accessible in original form. If Hessdalen's lights are natural, they represent a phenomenon that defies current atmospheric science. If they are technological, they demonstrate maneuverability beyond conventional aerospace capability. But the most unsettling element is not speed or brightness. It is persistence. The lights return to the same valley, decade after decade. They do not roam randomly across Europe. They appear in the same corridor of sky, over the same ridgelines, as if following an invisible route carved into the air itself. Why this valley? Why here? Repeatedly. In a place where science has been allowed to watch for over 40 years, the lights have never fully revealed their origin. They appear, they hover, they accelerate, they vanish, and then they return again the following winter. San Luis Valley. In 1975, Sheriff's Deputy Gabe Valdez was dispatched to investigate a series of unexplained cattle mutilations near Dulce on the northern edge of Colorado's San Luis Valley. The livestock had been found drained of blood, with surgical precision incisions and no visible tracks surrounding the bodies. As Valdez surveyed one of the sites at dusk, he noticed a glowing amber object hovering above the mesa, approximately 200 feet in the air. It remained motionless, despite strong crosswinds sweeping across the open desert. Then, without sound, it accelerated vertically and vanished into the night sky. The San Luis Valley spans nearly 8,000 square miles of high desert, framed by the Sangre de Cristo Mountains to the east and the San Juan Range to the west. It is sparsely populated, with long, uninterrupted sightlines across flat terrain. Over the past 5 decades, the valley has become one of the most consistently reported UFO hotspots in North America. Witnesses describe objects that behave in ways incompatible with conventional aircraft. Metallic discs hovering just above ground level, silent black triangles gliding low across fields, spheres that descend into dry lake beds before disappearing. In many cases, radar confirmation accompanies visual sightings. In 2003, a privately operated skywatch station in the valley documented over 300 anomalous aerial events within a 4-year period. Several were captured simultaneously on infrared cameras and radar arrays. One recorded object was tracked moving at approximately 2,000 miles per hour before halting abruptly in midair. No heat signature consistent with jet propulsion was detected. Retired aerospace engineers later reviewed the footage and concluded that the maneuver would generate G-forces far beyond human tolerance. Unlike isolated rural sightings, the San Luis Valley incidents often include electromagnetic interference. Vehicles stall unexpectedly when objects pass overhead. Electrical fencing systems shut down without mechanical fault. Radios dissolve into static seconds before luminous orbs appear. In one documented case, an entire stretch of rural power grid flickered off briefly, while a bright sphere hovered less than 500 feet above a ranch property. When the object departed, electricity returned immediately. Utility providers reported no malfunction in transmission lines. Military presence in the broader region has intensified periodically over the decades. Nearby installations conduct training exercises, yet officials consistently deny involvement in unexplained aerial activity. Several former air traffic controllers have stated that they were instructed not to log certain unidentified radar returns originating above the valley, particularly those without transponder codes or flight plans. Geologically, the valley sits along deep fault lines and is part of the Rio Grande Rift system. Seismic activity is present but moderate. Some researchers have speculated that tectonic stress could generate atmospheric plasma formations. However, plasma does not account for repeated structured movement, formation flying, or apparent intelligent hovering behavior observed across years. The valley's pattern is what distinguishes it. Sightings are not random. They tend to cluster along specific north-south corridors. Objects frequently appear to follow the same invisible path across the sky before vanishing toward mountain ridges. Why this valley? Why this corridor? If these phenomena are experimental military craft, they would be operating above civilian properties repeatedly and for decades. If they are natural, they demonstrate behavior that mimics surveillance. If they are neither, then the San Luis Valley may represent something more complex, a transit route rather than a destination. For 50 years, the desert floor has watched lights descend and ascend along the same pathways. The livestock incidents drew attention, the radar logs confirmed presence. The power disruptions suggested interaction, yet no official investigation has ever concluded what moves above that valley at night. The sky remains clear most evenings. The horizon stretches unbroken for miles, and sometimes, without warning, something crosses it, following a route that seems older than the fences below. Puerto Rico Trench. On October 28, 2013, an air traffic controller at Rafael Hernandez Airport in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, noticed an unidentified object on radar approaching from the Atlantic Ocean. It was flying low, below controlled airspace, with no transponder signal and no registered flight plan. The object moved inland at steady speed, crossed the airport perimeter, then headed back toward the ocean. Within minutes, a U.S. Customs and Border Protection aircraft equipped with thermal imaging cameras intercepted the anomaly. The footage that followed would become one of the most analyzed aerial recordings in recent history. The object appeared as a bright sphere on infrared display, approximately 3 to 5 feet in diameter. It emitted no visible exhaust plume and maintained a constant speed estimated at over 90 miles per hour at low altitude. As it approached the shoreline, the sphere did not slow. It did not arc downward. It continued in a straight trajectory and entered the Atlantic Ocean without creating a splash. There was no deceleration, no visible turbulence. The object passed seamlessly from air into water. Seconds later, it re-emerged. Thermal footage suggested that the object may have split into 2 separate bodies beneath the surface before reforming. Analysts reviewing the video noted the absence of conventional hydrodynamic drag. Submersible vehicles must account for pressure and resistance changes. This object displayed no such adjustment. It behaved identically in air and water. The location is significant. The Puerto Rico Trench lies just north of the island and plunges to depths exceeding 27,000 feet, making it the deepest point in the Atlantic Ocean. Naval sonar systems have recorded unexplained contacts in this region for decades, metallic shapes moving at speeds beyond known submarine capability. Objects that shift direction abruptly beneath thousands of feet of water. Reports from cargo ship crews and fishermen describe glowing lights rising vertically from the ocean surface before ascending into the sky. Local Coast Guard logs reference unidentified submersible anomalies that were rerouted for higher-level analysis. Some sonar technicians later described being instructed to categorize certain underwater returns as Type X events and forward them to restricted review channels. No public explanation was ever offered. Military surveillance infrastructure in the Caribbean is extensive. Undersea acoustic arrays monitor submarine movement. Airspace is patrolled by both U.S. and Allied forces. Yet no government agency has formally addressed repeated reports of objects transitioning between ocean and atmosphere in this corridor. Geologically, the trench sits at a tectonic boundary where the North American and Caribbean plates interact. Seismic activity is present but moderate. Some researchers have speculated that natural gas emissions or underwater electrical discharges could produce luminous phenomena. However, such processes do not explain sustained flight paths, radar tracking, synchronized infrared signatures, or controlled re-entry into airspace. The pattern is not random. Sightings cluster along the trench's edge. Radar returns appear in similar coordinates over multiple years. Objects frequently move from deep ocean zones toward the island's western coast, before vanishing again offshore. If these phenomena represent advanced human technology, then such craft operate freely across international waters and civilian airspace without acknowledgement. If they are natural, they represent a class of physics not currently understood. If they are neither, then the trench may serve as something more than a geological feature. Why would unidentified aerial objects repeatedly use the deepest part of the Atlantic as an entry point? Why demonstrate seamless travel between mediums where conventional engineering struggles? The ocean surface remains calm most nights. The radar screens show normal traffic, but beneath nearly 5 miles of water lies a corridor that has produced unexplained returns for generations. And occasionally, something rises from the depth, crosses into the sky, and disappears beyond it. Yakima Ridge. In the summer of 1972, a fire lookout stationed along Yakima Ridge in central Washington reported a luminous object hovering just above the tree line. It was oval in shape, pale white, and completely silent. The object remained stationary for nearly 10 minutes before accelerating horizontally at a speed that defied visual tracking. The lookout filed a report with his supervisor. The response was brief and dismissive. The lookout tower was closed within the year. Yakima Ridge stretches across rugged volcanic terrain near the Yakima Training Center, a major U.S. Army facility spanning more than 327,000 acres. The region is defined by basalt formations, deep ravines, and sparse pine forests. It is also marked by intermittent magnetic irregularities due to the volcanic rock composition. Over the decades, it has quietly accumulated a record of recurring unidentified aerial activity. Unlike sightings elsewhere, the Yakima incidents often involve direct interference with electrical systems. Campers have reported vehicle engines stalling moments before glowing orbs appear above the ridgeline. In multiple accounts, batteries drain instantly, and radios emit sharp bursts of static before falling silent. One documented case in 1994 described a transformer station losing power seconds before a black triangular craft hovered above a nearby clearing. When the object departed, electricity returned without mechanical failure detected in the grid. Forest Service workers have described lights that track along the ridge at low altitude, following the contours of the terrain rather than crossing directly over it. These objects reportedly move without sound, without navigation lights, and without observable propulsion systems. Some appear metallic under moonlight, others glow faintly from within. Military personnel have occasionally been stationed in the region during peak periods of activity. Officially, these deployments are linked to communications calibration or training exercises. Unofficially, several former service members have acknowledged that they were tasked with logging anomalous radar returns correlated with visual sightings. Those returns were classified as atmospheric distortions in public reports, Internal memos reportedly used the term electromagnetic corridor. In 2001, a group of amateur researchers positioned night vision cameras along the eastern slope of the ridge. They recorded a spherical object descending slowly toward the basalt cliffs before vanishing against the rock face. Infrared review suggested no heat plume and no sound signature. The footage, though grainy, demonstrated controlled vertical movement inconsistent with helicopters or fixed-wing aircraft. Geophysicists studying the region have noted that Yakima Ridge sits atop significant geological stress lines. Basalt layers contain iron-rich minerals capable of affecting local magnetic readings. Some researchers have suggested that piezoelectric effects during tectonic stress could generate luminous atmospheric phenomena. Yet, such explanations struggle to account for coordinated movement patterns, formation shifts, or repeated power disruption events aligned with sightings. What distinguishes Yakima Ridge is interaction. The objects do not merely pass overhead. They appear to influence electronic systems. Engines fail, radios distort, compass needles drift off alignment. These are not passive lights in the sky. They engage with infrastructure. Why would unidentified objects repeatedly appear above a military training region characterized by magnetic anomalies? If experimental aircraft were responsible, their operations would require extensive documentation. None has surfaced. If natural plasma formations were at play, they would not selectively disable mechanical systems seconds before becoming visible. The ridge remains isolated. Night falls quickly across the basalt slopes. Occasionally, something glides above the trees, silent and deliberate. The phenomenon does not linger over cities. It does not appear randomly across the continent. It returns to this narrow corridor of volcanic rock and military airspace again and again, as if something beneath the surface, or something in the sky, recognizes the ridge as more than landscape. Wycliffe Well. In May 1990, a group of travelers camping near the isolated roadhouse settlement of Wycliffe Well in Australia's Northern Territory were awakened by a deep, resonant hum. The desert air was still, the sky was clear. Above them, roughly 1,000 feet overhead, hovered a massive disc-shaped object, glowing with a dull orange light. It rotated slowly, but made no sound, no engine noise, no wind displacement. After several minutes, the object tilted slightly and ascended vertically, shrinking into a pinpoint before disappearing completely. For the witnesses, the event felt singular. For Wycliffe Well, it was routine. Located along the Stewart Highway, hundreds of miles from major cities, Wycliffe Well is often referred to as Australia's UFO capital. Since the late 1940s, sightings in this region have been reported with unusual frequency. During World War II, Australian servicemen stationed nearby logged strange lights crossing the sky at impossible speeds. In the decades that followed, truck drivers, tourists, and outback residents described metallic craft, hovering spheres, and silent formations moving above the McDonnell Ranges. Unlike many isolated sightings, Wycliffe Well demonstrates a peculiar pattern. Reports tend to spike during specific months of the year, particularly May and November. Observers have noted that appearances often occur within a narrow window of hours after sunset. Lights emerge low on the horizon, move in parallel lines, hover briefly, and then accelerate away in synchronized fashion. In 2003, a small team of independent investigators set up thermal cameras and long-range optical equipment for a 2-week monitoring session. During that period, they documented 12 separate aerial anomalies. One recording captured 3 bright objects forming a triangular configuration before shifting into a straight-line formation and vanishing sequentially. No conventional aircraft were recorded in the area at the time. Air traffic control logs showed no military exercises. The desert terrain surrounding Wycliffe Well is vast and flat, offering unobstructed visibility for miles. There are no major industrial facilities nearby, no large airports, no regular air corridors. Yet, reports consistently describe craft that maneuver with apparent intelligence. Some witnesses recount objects descending toward the desert floor before rising again. Others describe sudden accelerations that would exceed Mach 10 if distance estimates are accurate. Local Aboriginal communities have long maintained oral traditions describing sky visitors and luminous craft descending from above. These accounts predate modern aviation and include references to beings traveling between stars and desert plains. Anthropologists have noted similarities between ancient descriptions and modern sightings, though no formal study has been conducted to explore the connection. Official response to the phenomenon has been minimal. Australian defense agencies have occasionally attributed sightings to experimental aircraft or atmospheric effects. However, no publicly acknowledged test programs align with the repeated decades-long pattern in this specific region. What distinguishes Wycliffe Well is regularity. The sightings are not clustered around a military base. They are not tied to geological anomalies known for electromagnetic discharge. They appear according to a rhythm, returning to the same corridor of desert year after year. Why would unidentified aerial phenomena follow seasonal cycles in an isolated stretch of outback? Why return to the same horizon, the same ridgelines, the same open sky? The desert remains quiet most nights. The roadhouse lights glow faintly along the highway. And sometimes, without warning, shapes appear above the horizon. Not random, not chaotic, but moving with the consistency of something that has been here before. As if the land itself marks a waypoint invisible to those below. Mount Shasta. In the summer of 1987, multiple hikers ascending the southern slope of Mount Shasta in Northern California reported a luminous object emerging from behind the peak just before dusk. The craft appeared metallic, reflecting the fading sunlight across its curved surface. It hovered for several seconds approximately 500 feet above the ridgeline, then descended toward the mountain's western face. Instead of passing over it, the object seemed to sink directly into the rock. No explosion, no impact. It simply vanished against the stone, as if the mountain were hollow. Mount Shasta rises over 14,000 feet above sea level and dominates the surrounding landscape for hundreds of miles. It is an active stratovolcano, though its last major eruption occurred centuries ago. The region is sparsely populated but heavily monitored due to seismic sensitivity. Geological surveys have mapped deep magma chambers beneath the mountain and complex tunnel-like lava formations extending outward from its base. Since the early 20th century, Shasta has accumulated a record of recurring aerial anomalies. Pilots have reported radar dropouts while flying near the summit. In several cases, small aircraft experience temporary compass drift and minor instrument irregularities before systems normalized once clear of the peak. In 1992, a civilian pilot filed a report describing a bright disc-shaped object pacing his aircraft at roughly 120 knots before accelerating vertically beyond sight within seconds. Unlike desert sightings, Shasta's phenomena often involve proximity to terrain. Witnesses consistently describe objects entering or exiting near the mountainside, rather than traversing open sky. Infrared photographs taken in the early 2000s showed unexplained heat signatures along the northwestern slope during nighttime hours, though no geothermal vents were officially recorded at those coordinates. Mount Shasta has long held spiritual significance for indigenous communities, who describe it as a place of power and gateways. Oral histories mention beings descending from the sky and interacting with the mountain itself. While such accounts are not scientific evidence, their persistence across generations adds cultural weight to the location's reputation. In the 1990s, researchers from a private geophysical firm conducted magnetic field measurements around the mountain's base. They documented minor but measurable anomalies in localized regions. These irregularities were attributed to volcanic mineral content. However, no comprehensive study was allowed to proceed after initial findings were submitted. Access to certain high-elevation zones has been periodically restricted under environmental and safety regulations. What distinguishes Mount Shasta is the verticality of the sightings. Objects do not merely cross above it, they interact with it, they descend toward it, they appear to enter or emerge from its slopes. If experimental aircraft were responsible, such maneuvers would be hazardous and unnecessary. If natural plasma phenomena were involved, they would dissipate rather than penetrate solid terrain. Why would unidentified objects repeatedly approach a volcanic mountain and vanish along its rock face? Why cluster around a structure that extends miles beneath the surface through lava tubes and magma chambers? The mountain stands immovable, snow-capped for much of the year. Climbers ascend its slopes unaware of what others claim to have seen near its summit. Radar occasionally flickers near its peak, instruments briefly hesitate, and sometimes, as the sun drops behind the ridgeline, something glides along the stone and disappears, not into the sky, but into the mountain itself. Rendlesham Forest. In December 1980, just after midnight, security personnel stationed at RAF Woodbridge in Suffolk, England, observed strange lights descending into Rendlesham Forest. The base was operated by the United States Air Force and housed nuclear weapons under NATO command. When radar operators reported no aircraft distress signals and no authorized flights in the area, a small team was dispatched to investigate what they assumed was a downed plane. What they found was not wreckage. Deep within the forest clearing, witnesses described a metallic object resting on 3 short legs, approximately 9 feet long and 6 feet high. Its surface appeared smooth and reflective, almost glass-like, yet solid. A pulsating blue light illuminated the surrounding trees. When one airman approached, he reported that the object's surface bore strange symbols etched into its exterior, roughly 3 inches in height. The symbols resembled hieroglyphs but matched no known alphabet. The object emitted no engine noise. No heat signature was detected by touch. Yet, Geiger counters carried by the team recorded radiation readings higher than background levels, particularly at 3 indentations in the soil beneath where the craft had reportedly stood. Those indentations formed a near-perfect equilateral triangle, each depression measuring roughly 7 inches deep. Within seconds, the object lifted silently through the trees and disappeared. 2 nights later, Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt led a larger investigative team into the same forest. This time, the event was documented on an audio recorder. The recording captured Holt, describing a red glowing orb moving through the trees. The object appeared to break apart into smaller lights before streaking toward the horizon. Moments later, a bright beam of light was seen descending from the sky into a nearby weapons storage area. Holt's voice on tape is steady, but strained as instruments spike and the phenomenon intensifies. Subsequent analysis of the forest floor revealed broken branches at heights of 15 to 20 feet, suggesting something had maneuvered between the trees rather than crashed. Photographs taken that night were later reported missing from base archives. Requests for official documentation were met with denials or heavily redacted reports. The British Ministry of Defense classified the incident as having no significance to national security, despite the proximity to nuclear storage facilities. Over the years, several of the original witnesses developed unexplained health issues, including cancers and neurological disorders. Some claim they were warned not to discuss the incident publicly. Others state that intelligence officers conducted follow-up interviews that were never acknowledged in official records. Freedom of Information releases confirmed that the U.S. Air Force conducted an internal review, but the conclusions remain sealed. Rendlesham Forest has since been called Britain's Roswell. Yet, unlike Roswell, this case contains audio evidence, multiple trained military observers, radiation data, physical ground traces, and documented official response. It was not a lone civilian sighting. It was a NATO installation reporting an object landing within walking distance of nuclear assets. If the object was terrestrial, it represented technology decades ahead of its time. If it was not, then it deliberately approached one of the most strategically sensitive locations in Western Europe during the Cold War. Why would something unknown choose that forest? Why hover near weapons stockpiles? Why return on consecutive nights? The trees of Rendlesham still stand. Visitors walk the same paths where indentations were once measured. But the tape recording remains, a calm military voice describing something that should not have been there, and something that knew exactly where it was. Colares Island. In September 1977, residents of Colares Island, a small fishing community off the northern coast of Brazil, began reporting lights descending from the sky at night. At first, they were dismissed as distant aircraft or unusual atmospheric effects. But within weeks, the reports intensified. Witnesses described luminous objects hovering just above rooftops and emitting narrow beams of concentrated light directed at individuals standing outdoors. Those struck by the beams reported immediate weakness, dizziness, and small puncture-like marks on their skin. Local physician Dr. Welaide Sacim Carvalho documented dozens of cases. Victims presented with symptoms resembling radiation exposure, fatigue, nausea, burns without visible flames, and unexplained blood loss. Some marks appeared geometric, circular, or linear, with no signs of tearing or abrasion. The injuries were consistent across patients who had no contact with each other. Fear spread quickly. Entire families began sleeping indoors, with windows sealed or gathering in groups outside, armed with flashlights and fireworks to deter whatever was hovering above them. The phenomenon escalated to such a degree that the Brazilian Air Force initiated a covert investigation known as Operation Saucer. Led by Captain Uyrange Holanda, a specialized military unit arrived on the island equipped with cameras, night vision optics, radiation meters, and high-resolution lenses. Over several months, they documented multiple aerial events. Photographs taken during the operation show spherical craft, cigar-shaped objects, and discs maneuvering silently above the tree line. In one recorded account, a soldier described being temporarily paralyzed, while a luminous object hovered less than 30 feet above him. Thermal anomalies were measured during several sightings. Radiation readings fluctuated intermittently, though not consistently high enough to classify as nuclear hazard. The objects demonstrated controlled flight, occasionally approaching individuals before retreating at high speed. Unlike distant lights in remote skies, these were close encounters. They interacted with people. Then, abruptly, Operation Saucer was terminated. All official documentation was classified. Film reels, photographs, and written reports were transferred to military archives. Public explanation cited lack of evidence for continued investigation. Captain Hollanda later gave a rare interview decades afterward, confirming the operation's existence and describing phenomena that he claimed were real and intelligently controlled. Weeks after that interview, he was found dead in his home. Authorities ruled it a suicide. Colleagues disputed the timing. The island's residents were left with no resolution. Government officials denied long-term significance. Medical records from the period were reportedly misplaced. Requests for military documentation returned heavily redacted files. To this day, full operational footage from Operation Saucer has not been publicly released. Colares differs from other locations on this list in one critical way. The objects did not simply hover at a distance. They approached individuals. They caused physical symptoms. They returned repeatedly over several weeks before disappearing entirely. Why would unidentified aerial phenomena focus so intensely on a remote island community? Why conduct what appeared to be direct interaction rather than distant observation? And why did official investigation cease so suddenly, despite documented injuries and military involvement? The island remains quiet now. Fishing boats still depart at dawn. The beaches appear ordinary under sunlight. Yet those who lived through that autumn remember beams of light descending from above, targeting rooftops and bodies alike. Colares was not merely a sighting hotspot. It was an engagement zone, and whatever came there did not seem accidental. Skinwalker Ranch. In 1996, a family that had recently purchased a remote 512-acre ranch in northeastern Utah began documenting events that defied explanation. The property, located near the Uinta Basin, was surrounded by barbed wire and open sky. On their first night, they observed a large wolf-like creature standing nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder, unaffected by rifle fire. Days later, cattle were found mutilated in patterns similar to incidents reported decades earlier in Colorado. Then the lights began appearing. Bright orbs hovered above the ranch at low altitude, often emerging from what witnesses described as a shimmering distortion in the sky. These objects moved slowly at first, then accelerated at impossible angles. In some cases, they appeared to open briefly into dark circular voids before closing again. The phenomena were not limited to lights. Electronic equipment malfunctioned repeatedly. Cameras lost power at critical moments. Batteries drained without cause. The ranch's location is significant. It lies within a region known for geological fractures and unusual magnetic readings. The Uinta Basin contains underground hydrocarbon deposits and fault lines that extend deep beneath the desert floor. Some researchers have suggested that tectonic stress may contribute to luminous atmospheric effects. However, what unfolded at the ranch went beyond lights in the sky. In 1996, aerospace entrepreneur Robert Bigelow purchased the property and initiated a multi-year investigation under the National Institute for Discovery Science. Surveillance cameras, motion sensors, infrared arrays, and electromagnetic monitors were installed across the land. Scientists documented recurring anomalies, orbs emerging from midair, cattle disappearing from enclosed pens without physical breach, radar returns showing objects descending vertically before vanishing at low altitude. In several recorded instances, bright blue spheres were observed entering what appeared to be a stable portal roughly 20 feet above ground. Instruments detected sudden spikes in electromagnetic radiation during these events. Researchers reported feeling pressure changes in the air, similar to rapid altitude shifts. Attempts to track the objects with infrared equipment often failed when devices shut down unexpectedly. In 2007, the U.S. Department of Defense quietly funded a classified program, known as the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, to examine anomalies linked to the ranch and similar sites. While the program's stated objective focused on aerospace threats, internal documents referenced recurrent unidentified aerial phenomena associated with electromagnetic disturbance. Funding continued for several years before being publicly discontinued. Unlike isolated sighting zones, Skinwalker Ranch became a long-term monitored site with continuous instrumentation. Yet definitive explanations never materialized. Datasets were collected, archived, and in some cases transferred to federal agencies. Public reports summarized findings as inconclusive. Why would multiple independent phenomena cluster within the same confined geographic space? Why would orbs, electronic interference, and unexplained animal events coincide repeatedly over decades? If natural causes were responsible, they would need to account for structured movement, apparent responsive behavior, and instrument disruption occurring simultaneously. The ranch remains under restricted ownership today. Monitoring continues in various forms. Visitors are not permitted beyond its gates. Some locations merely attract sightings. Skinwalker Ranch appears to sustain interaction. And if interaction is occurring, then something within that 512-acre stretch of desert may function not as a destination, but as a doorway. Bonnybridge. In March 1992, a delivery driver traveling near the town of Bonnybridge in central Scotland pulled off the road after noticing a triangular shadow gliding silently overhead. The object was matte black, roughly 30 to 40 feet across, with 3 steady white lights positioned at each corner and a faint red glow in the center. It made no engine noise. No rotor wash disturbed the surrounding trees. Within seconds, it accelerated upward at an angle so steep that the driver later stated it seemed to fold into the sky. Bonnybridge lies between Glasgow and Edinburgh, not in a remote desert or mountain range, but within a densely monitored air corridor. Commercial flights regularly cross overhead. Military aircraft operate from nearby bases. Civilian radar coverage is extensive. Yet since the early 1990s, this small region has recorded one of the highest concentrations of UFO sightings per square mile in the United Kingdom. Local police logs reveal over 300 reports within a few years. Witnesses consistently describe structured craft rather than vague lights. Black triangles, silent discs, and metallic cylinders have been observed hovering above farmland and residential areas alike. In several cases, objects were reported to remain stationary against strong winds before departing at extreme speed. Radar confirmation distinguishes Bonnybridge from many rural hotspots. Air traffic controllers in the region have acknowledged unidentified returns appearing briefly on screens before vanishing without transponder codes. In at least 2 documented incidents during the mid-1990s, radar operators tracked objects descending rapidly from high altitude, stopping abruptly above the Fourth Valley, and then climbing vertically beyond radar ceiling limits. No military exercises were scheduled during those times. Unlike desert sightings, Bonnybridge's events occur over populated neighborhoods. Residents have reported television interference and temporary loss of satellite signals when objects pass overhead. One family described their home's electrical system dimming as a triangular craft hovered less than 200 feet above their roof. The event lasted approximately 40 seconds before the object drifted silently northward. The area is also geographically intriguing. Bonnybridge sits near intersecting fault lines beneath central Scotland. Geophysical surveys indicate minor magnetic irregularities in localized zones. Some researchers have suggested that tectonic stress might contribute to unusual atmospheric lights. However, Plasma discharges do not produce symmetrical triangular silhouettes or structured formations. Authorities have historically downplayed the events. Official statements attribute sightings to military aircraft, weather balloons, or misidentified commercial planes. Yet no aircraft in standard inventory matches the silent hovering and rapid vertical acceleration repeatedly described. Freedom of Information requests regarding radar logs have returned incomplete data sets with sections redacted under national security exemptions. What makes Bonnybridge particularly unsettling is density. It is not a single dramatic incident, but an accumulation of structured craft sightings over a concentrated geographic zone. Reports have continued intermittently for over 3 decades. Witnesses change. Descriptions remain consistent. Why would unidentified aerial objects cluster above a populated corridor within one of Europe's most surveilled airspaces? Why risk observation in an area saturated with radar coverage? If experimental aircraft were involved, their repeated exposure to civilian witnesses would seem counterproductive. The valley remains ordinary during daylight hours. Traffic flows along rural roads. Aircraft follow scheduled routes overhead. Yet, when night falls, residents sometimes glance upward expecting to see something that should not be there, and often they do. Puerto Rico Trench. In August 1995, the crew of a commercial cargo vessel navigating north of Puerto Rico reported a bright sphere rising from the ocean surface approximately 2 miles off their port side. The object emerged vertically without creating a visible splash. It hovered roughly 50 feet above the water for several seconds before accelerating skyward at extraordinary speed. The captain logged the sighting. Radar operators on nearby coastal installations recorded an unidentified return originating near the same coordinates, just above the boundary of the Puerto Rico Trench. The Puerto Rico Trench descends more than 27,000 feet beneath the Atlantic Ocean, making it the deepest known point in that basin. It is a zone of intense geological activity, where the North American and Caribbean plates converge. Seismic monitoring equipment is abundant. Naval sonar arrays track submarine movement across this region continuously. Yet, for decades, sonar operators have described unexplained high-velocity contacts moving through deep water at speeds exceeding known submarine capability. These underwater returns often exhibit abrupt directional shifts and sudden vertical ascents. In multiple classified naval reports later partially released through information requests, technicians noted metallic signatures traveling at velocities that would generate extreme hydrodynamic stress. No cavitation trails were detected. No conventional propulsion noise accompanied the readings. The 2013 Aguadilla thermal footage documented an object transitioning from air into water without deceleration. Analysts concluded that the object maintained consistent velocity through both mediums. That detail is critical. Conventional aerospace engineering requires distinct adaptations for atmospheric and aquatic environments, yet the observed behavior demonstrated no change in performance. Civilian fishermen have long reported luminous shapes visible beneath the surface at night, moving parallel to their vessels before descending into darkness. In one 2001 account, a small fishing boat experienced sudden electrical failure as a bright glow passed directly underneath. Batteries drained instantly. Navigation systems rebooted only after the light disappeared. Military presence in the Caribbean is extensive, with continuous patrols and acoustic surveillance networks. Despite this, no agency has publicly acknowledged a sustained investigation into unidentified objects operating at the trench boundary. Some former sonar operators have stated that certain anomalous returns were coded and forwarded to higher command under special classification, never to be discussed again. Geophysicists have proposed natural explanations such as bioluminescent marine life, underwater gas plumes, or seismic-induced plasma effects. However, such phenomena do not account for synchronized radar detection, repeated vertical ascent patterns, or consistent trajectory tracking across decades. Unlike mountain hotspots or desert corridors, the trench introduces depth as a variable. Nearly 5 miles of water separate the ocean floor from the sky above. If unidentified objects are operating here, they possess the ability to move seamlessly between extreme pressure environments and open atmosphere, Why would one of the deepest geological features on Earth repeatedly coincide with unidentified aerial and submersible phenomena? Why cluster along a tectonic boundary beneath heavily monitored waters? The trench remains unseen by most of humanity. Its darkness extends farther downward than Everest rises upward. Sonar pulses echo across its walls. Ships pass overhead unaware of what may travel beneath them. And occasionally, something ascends from the depth, crosses into the sky, and vanishes beyond radar range. Conclusion: these locations reveal a troubling pattern. They are not random sightings scattered across the globe. They are fixed coordinates, deserts, forests, valleys, mountains, trenches, that continue to generate the same types of anomalies decade after decade. The recurrence is what matters. The repetition is what demands attention. Area 51, Rendlesham Forest, Hessdalen Valley, San Luis Valley, Puerto Rico, Yakima Ridge, Wycliffe Well, Mount Shasta, Colares, Skinwalker Ranch, Bonnybridge, different countries, different terrains, different political systems. Yet the reports share structural similarities: silent craft, sudden acceleration, radar confirmation, electromagnetic disruption, military interest, restricted access, redacted documents. This is not a collection of isolated stories. It is a global cluster. In many of these regions, investigations were initiated and then abruptly terminated. Data was collected and classified. Witnesses were interviewed and reassigned. Radar logs were partially released. Photographic evidence disappeared. Military and intelligence agencies consistently categorized the events as atmospheric anomalies or misidentifications. Yet internal memoranda often referenced unidentified external activity or electromagnetic corridor effects. The language changed, the pattern did not. If these phenomena are advanced human technology, then such technology has been operating in civilian airspace for decades without acknowledgement. If they are natural, then natural science has yet to account for structured movement, seamless air-to-sea transitions, or repeated instrument interference. If they are something else entirely, then certain geographic zones appear to function as recurring access points. The most unsettling element is not the lights themselves, it is the geography, the clustering near fault lines, the proximity to deep ocean trenches, the overlap with restricted military airspace, the seasonal cycles, the corridors that repeat. The question is no longer whether unidentified objects appear in the sky. The question is why they return to the same places. Why these coordinates? Why these mountains, these deserts, these valleys? Why the deepest trench in the Atlantic? Perhaps the greater anomaly is not what is flying above us. It is the possibility that parts of Earth itself are being used, observed, revisited, or monitored in ways we do not yet understand. The sky over these locations remains open, the oceans remain deep, the mountains remain silent, and whatever continues to return, there has never fully explained why.